Hi there, everyone. Today I'm looking at Metal Gear Solid 1 Tactical Espionage Action. So, for context, back in the day, I was introduced really to Snake through, and if I think about it now, probably Super Smash Brothers Brawl. It was kind of like, okay, this guy's like some military SOCOM guy. I had no context, I had no idea. I didn't really own a PlayStation back in the day. And so I was introduced to them through Smash Brothers, and Smash Brothers has been a branch by which I played a lot of really great games. And so that's kind of always how I was introduced to Snake. And so I was just interested, okay, is this a weird spy game, whatever? People talk a lot about it. And so back in the day, what I did is I saw, oh, well, I can play the Twin Snakes on the GameCube, and that's a remake of the original, so I can play that. And then eventually bought a PS2 and played all the other games. And really, I kind of was in a mode where I just saw the PS2 library had so many good things that I bought it, but it wasn't until much later I actually got a PS1 and saw there's a pretty decent library on there too. So I've been going through it over the years, and I just thought, I just keep seeing all these short form videos and references to Metal Gear 1, Metal Gear Solid 1, and it's very difficult to think, well, I played a remake of that, so I don't really need to play the original. And so I just wanted to go through my experience of really going back to the original of something where I've only played the remake. And it's really interesting because in the sense that remakes today are pretty much they're one to one. There's so little difference in terms of graphics or even controls or like aspect ratio or whatever that a remaster of a game today is just like a re-release. It's a copy almost. While with this game, it's Twin Snakes and original Metal Gear Solid was very different. So I'm going to go through some of those major differences. Um, right off the bat, aesthetically, Metal Gear Solid 1 is of course much more low poly. It looks very aesthetically different from the Twin Snakes. And the Twin Snakes, it's funny that looking back at that game, you kind of realize how similar it was to Metal Gear Solid 2, that it really was just trying to be Metal Gear Solid 2 in its essence and spirit, but just with the same story and all the same aspects of Metal Gear Solid 1. And so when you play Metal Gear Solid 1, it's a really different game. And the thing that, so yeah, first up, aesthetically, I actually really prefer the original, mainly because it's a lot darker, and a lot of game engines were much darker, uh, just by the fact of how they're made in that time. But what I really liked about it is that to compensate for the darkness of this weird Alaskan military facility, is that they cranked up the saturation. So you have these really strong blues and greens, and during the final confrontation with Liquid, it feels so different because everything's vast in this red hue where there's just red everywhere. And it's such a thematically different feeling experience than the Twin Snakes. And so, just right off the bat, I have to say, aesthetically, I would say the original Metal Gear Solid is actually much better. Another thing that I also noticed is the technology aesthetic was also much more well done in the original. Everything from the Nikita missile with its interfaces, really the Stinger missile with its interface and how it had, like, I don't want to say the longitude, but the meterage from where you're firing, all the little gizmos and gadgets and little screens and stuff was really cool. And I always remembered it was somewhat disappointing and a letdown in the remake how when you would fire the Stinger missile, it was just like a blue streak and just a little like two pins or whatever over a screen with a red triangle or red diamond rather. I always thought it's kind of underwhelming for this really cool, hefty military technological device, and basically I was just kind of let down by that. But in this game, it's a lot. It feels a lot cooler. Also, even when Metal Gear appears and it gets blown up, it's also a lot cooler. So aesthetically, I would have to say, yeah, the original would have to take that point, just of how the game looks and those colors, how it adds to the mood of the experience. The next thing I'd like to talk about is probably the gameplay. The gameplay was the other thing that really stuck out to me because Ever since I played Metal Gear Solid, I've always kind of hated it in a gameplay perspective in a weird way. And that I would the game would never do what I wanted it to do. And what I mean by that is really it was GameCube or you know Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3 using the stick. My problem. Okay, this is it. My problem was I was approaching Metal Gear Solid like a stealth game. I was approaching it from another game I played, which was Splinter Cell. And Splinter Cell is, in my perspective, a real stealth game, while Metal Gear Solid is an action game with stealth mechanics at certain points, and really does a lot of different things. Never in a Splinter Cell game are you going to be asked to run up to a tank and blow it up, or do some weird mini game nonsense by shooting remote controlled missiles around a maze. Splinter Cell it's a very kind of strict, streamlined experience. Well, this one has a bunch of variety in mini games, and that's kind of another thing that really struck me is that it reminded me of other games that I really think are some of my favorites of all time, like Zelda, like Sonic to a certain extent, where for Nier, a good example is that the gameplay is never really consistent. It's always kind of throwing these new mechanics at you, these new weird things. And Kojima's known for his really one-off weird instances of just overall weird one-off things. Like I don't know, for example, I didn't know the first time you played it that you could use the box to transport yourself around the base, which goes all the way back to his original series, Metal Gear 1 and 2. And I guess on that point, the biggest gameplay change, I would say, is probably just how the environments work and how you can go into first person mode. So mechanically, I realized a lot of things were stripped away, or rather, a lot of things were added to the Twin Snakes that really only should have existed in the Metal Gear Solid 2 design philosophy, and when they're brought backwards into its previous installment, it does feel a little bit off. You shouldn't really be able to fire in first person mode, especially for things like the Ocelot fight. It's not intended for that. I remember the Ocelot fight, I died so many times, mainly because I was trying to... It's funny, when I think about it, I was so frustrated with that fight because I thought what you had to do is you had to lean against the wall and then come out of cover and shoot at Ocelot when he's firing at you. That is a Metal Gear Solid 2 only mechanic. And so when you bring it into that game, that seems like the intent of the fight, but it's not at all. And so I died so many times, honestly, just from trying to get up to the wall, and I accidentally kept tripping over Baker's tripwires and setting them off, and it was super, super annoying. While in the original, because you can't shoot in first person, the whole thing is you need to chase him around the map, which seems ridiculous in a stealth espionage action game. You're supposed to hide. And no. They want you to chase the guy with a revolver around the map and gun him down, basically. And I think that's actually how I beat him, even though I fell in the Twin Snakes, which I thought, I must have cheated or something. But no, that's the intent of the original fight. And I think a lot of people bring up this fight as an example of how they messed it up, and I totally understand that now. More so to that, I was also surprised that when I started this game, I realized, I can't use the control sticks. I could only use the D-pad to move around, and it finally hit me. Oh, right. Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2 use that exact same design. They could only use the D-pad and not the control sticks to navigate. And the whole world is actually on a kind of, a grid system. And it just made so much more sense to me, where I realized, this really is the sequel to Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, because it's still working on that grid-based system. It's just in 3D now. And navigating into the fully 3D world where you can go diagonally and all these other directions in 2 and 3, they never really translated well for me. And that's why I kind of understood, I don't know, just the development of the philosophy and how, they expect you to play the game in a certain way, almost in the way that you've played the previous one. To that point, I would always screw up in 2, 3, and Twin Snakes, because the degree from walking and sneaking to running, I would always mess that up. I would always be inconsistent, and I'd always just screw it up somehow because I was just never good enough to go fast, but not too fast, or not too fast rather. And in this game, when you have the D-pad, you don't have to worry about how much noise you're making unless you walk on a certain surface. So, yeah, it was just a very interesting experience that there were a bunch of things that were removed from the gameplay elements that actually made the game play better. It's like, oh yeah, we could give you now this kind of mechanic to shoot first person, but you're not actually supposed to do that. And so by adding that in there, it really kind of messed it up, which is just really interesting to me. It's like, oh, here's this thing you can do in your car, or here's this thing you can do on your computer, but should you? They don't really tell you you shouldn't, so it's confusing in that. Even things like grip strength or the whole gripping thing, I didn't realize that was a Metal Gear Solid 2 only mechanic, and that completely changes the layout of the final area in the Metal Gear loading bay, where in the original, every ladder is a loading zone to another area, while in 2, or rather in Twin Snakes rather, it's just one giant room, and you can actually drop down to other things. And they also added in the pipes for the for fast tracking, getting the PAL cards heated or cooled to the right temperature. I actually never figured that out by myself. That was like a weird secret thing that they added that I needed to watch a video for, because it wasn't telegraphed to me at all. But yeah, that whole room has a different dynamic where you can navigate using the ledges. And also the whole ledge hanging thing was just so wildly different. Even the first tank hanger era, you could go off all those ledges as well. So I don't know, it was very interesting in that aspect, where by adding too many new mechanics to an older game, it really doesn't improve the experience. It really, if anything, confuses the player by giving them so many tools in their tool belt that the problem you have in front of you, I know, it's like building an IKEA cabinet, and they give you, instead of just a screwdriver and the parts, they're giving you a power drill and a special hammer and a buzz saw. And it's like, I don't need to use any of these. And if you do try to use them, you're going to mess up what you're trying to do. So that was really interesting to me. So you really, I know, from a design philosophy, you only want to give the player the tools that are intended for the job. I mean, still, it was a good experience, but whatever. Also, back to aesthetics and really cinematography. The one thing that I keep hearing about Twin Snakes that I just never really understood is that, oh, they screwed up all the cutscenes. They made Snake too goofy, too action-oriented, too Matrix-ified. And I kind of didn't really get it until I saw the comparison of, oh yeah, the Vulcan Raven fight, where the first one, where Snake takes the grenade and tosses it and like slams it into the tank hole. I understood, oh right, that's okay. That didn't happen at all. That's completely over the top. The other scene where he like does a dive over the doorway where he thinks Ocelot and Liquid are listening to him. So it's like, okay, so they added all these things, but at the same token, the original game, you still have the scene where people are shooting at Snake in an elevator and he jumps backwards and he dodges the bullets. So all these other crazy things don't really feel out of place in the Metal Gear Solid universe to me. I still have a lot of love for the Twin Snakes and all of their cutscenes and their over-the-topness. Even when Gray Fox has that thing where he slices a piece of concrete from the ceiling and kicks it at Snake. Okay, that's crazy. But it really, to say that it feels out of place in the Metal Gear Solid universe is just really disingenuous. Like, guys, come on. Like, you still have a cyborg ninja running around smacking his head into the floor in the original saying "hurt me more, Snake." Like, I'm sorry, but it's already pretty crazy, and drawing the line there at the Kino cool cutscenes just seems disingenuous to me. But I understand a little bit of the idea in this. I have some sympathy for the idea, where that idea comes from. Additionally, on the cutscenes, I this is one thing. So I could give or take the original cutscenes or the new cutscenes. What really did surprise me about the original cutscenes actually was actually specifically Gray Fox and any kind of environment where I was surprised to see that they had that blur effect where if you had a light source like red laser eyes or whatever, that they would have kind of this low trail as they moved. And I find the special effects in the original were actually really impressive. When they had these, these scenes where they had like zoom outs and zoom ins, and they had tone changes and these really interesting um, I don't know, filters for lack of a better word. I was really surprised and impressed that they could actually do that on PS1 software. It was kind of, or hardware rather. It was just very impressive. The other one that's the really big thing for me though is uh, just the music. Specifically that in the original, I think this is so important because it completely changes the tone of the original game and Twin Snakes. I think this is what Twin Snakes really misses out on, is that in multiple times in the original, you have the best is yet to come. The bridge or the chorus kicks in at certain scenes when Meryl's been shot and when Sniper Wolf dies. And yeah, the Sniper Wolf scene is absolutely 100%, I would say, all borderline ruined in the Twin Snakes. This is the one thing where I saw that and I thought, okay, I need to play the original. I absolutely need to play the original. Also because of the voice acting, which I'll get into in a second. But using the best is yet to come at those pivotal scenes is so, I think, important because it sets, I know it's a more emotional tone. It's way more emotional with that music there. But additionally, it feels more full when you finish the game and they play the best is yet to come. When I first beat the Twin Snakes and they played that, I mean, it's such a beautiful song, but when they first played it at the end of the game, I was kind of taken aback where I said, "Oh wow, this is really intense suddenly." I just thought, where did this come from? It was kind of like one of those tone changes where the credits didn't match the feeling of the game. It was like it's a beautiful song, but after I beat Twin Snakes, I thought, is this part of the game? Kind of question mark. I had this similar experience where, and I still think there's no way to salvage it, where you had Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The credit song for that game is like a Disney R&B style song, and it's still really totally off, like 100%. There's nothing you can do to tell me that that song belongs in the Castlevania universe where it's like guitar and rock and roll. There's absolutely nothing you can do to convince me that that song belongs there. But in any case, I kind of digress here. Um, so having that song, even having pieces of it throughout the main game in the original, it sets the tone and it brings back that tone in its fullness and those themes in its fullness when the game ends and you have all that the footage and the cutscenes and the credits roll and you have the full song and it finally reveals itself in a way. The full idea reveals itself, and I think that's a very cool thing to do that a lot of games do anyway, and it's actually somewhat cheap or easy to do, where you take the main theme and you remix it one, two, three, four amount of times. One thing that comes to mind is maybe not the best example, but Sonic Adventure 2. The main menu is the opening riff and a version of Live and Learn, and you get the full song at the final battle of the game. It reveals the full thing with all the lyrics, everything. The core idea is present essentially. It's the main song is the soul of any game really, from Halo to whatever, to Earthbound. I don't think Earthbound really has a theme song actually. Mother 1 though, the song is literally the function by which you defeat the final boss, which is still one of the coolest things I've seen. But I digress. Um so yeah, I love the music choice in the original game. What they replaced it with in the Twin Snakes were just typical like sad guitar or piano or violin music, and I just eh, like it's okay, but it's you cannot hold a candle to the best is yet to come. It's one of the most beautiful songs in media in general. It's really, really amazing in terms of vocals and whatever. And we've had like 20, 30 years of gaming since then. It's still it's up there with definitely the most beautiful song I've heard. Maybe Nier comes close, but really, you're competing with Nier, artist thing. Um, so there's that. Also, that scene with Sniper Wolf absolutely just ruined. I think having all the wolves there and having crowding around her, I don't know, it just it didn't feel right. It didn't feel as impactful. And and I mean, if I'm really to get into the analysis of the theme and the music and what it's saying is that that music only plays when the characters are suffering and they're reflecting, and it's kind of this, I guess, yearning for the suffering of life and what the purpose of it is, and then you overcome the suffering and just learn to live your life because you're not some soldier stuck in some nuclear war or something. And really, it's about the individual overcoming uh, the impossible, overcoming the problems in the world, and not being an individual despite being caught up in the machine of the military industrial complex. uh, I think also aesthetically, what's interesting about the original game is that you have, the character models are really interesting because they have bodies, but they don't have faces. They have like little smudges where their eyes are, so you can't tell what they really look like. But then you have the coda conversations, which add to what they really look like. And I 100% prefer the original codec calls in the original, because in Twin Snakes they added a bit of transparency and about a bunch of stuff, but I really like the black screen and it's just completely dark, and then you just have the two character models talking to each other. It feels almost more artistic in that way, especially when it was the limitation. But I just think it actually looks really, really cool. It's just so there's just more contrast. You just have total black and then the green screens where they're talking. I don't know, it's really, really cool. And I also love how the fact that even the text around the names you select have a bit of I don't know, bloom or aberration around the pixels of the name, so it gives it this weird glowing effect. It's so simple, but they cleaned everything. That's what I'm saying. You lose your soul. Soul, I don't know. Soul in games is so hard to describe, but I think one way to say it is that soul is the messiness or the weird ephemeral mistakes someone made or limitation they had, that they made some weird decision which makes it feel more unique in that sense. And when you look at Twin Snakes, everything's clean, everything's crisp, and there's no more mystery to it. So yeah, I love the codec call interaction screen. Oh, I was talking about in that screen you have a lot of voice acting, and so yeah, and so even though sorry, it's interesting how it reminds me of Final Fantasy VII, for example, where when you first start the game and you see Cloud, he is a chonky pixel boy, and I was always confused. Okay, how did this become Mr. Emo or whatever? And then you realize, oh, right, there's like a way for the developer to reinterpret what Cloud really looks like. So even though he's this big pixelated chunk on the screen, when you go into battle mode or you have a cutscene, you see, oh, that's what he really is supposed to look like. But I like how you have this push and pull between um, what is abstract and what is non-abstract, and the levels of abstraction are dynamic throughout the whole game experience. Technically, you have three different clouds in Final Fantasy VII. You have overworld pixel cloud, where he's walking around. You have cutscene cloud, where he's the same kind of pixel model, but more refined and more HD and almost claymation like. And then you have battle cloud, where he's in the battle, but he's he's a normal proportioned human being now, and has this whatever, and he has just this little fanfare. And so it's similar here, where you have two different snakes. You have the gameplay snake, where again he almost has no face, and you have the codec call snake, where you see, oh, it's a very high def or high def version of just his face. So you can say, okay, that's more or less what he looks like. I also really loved the opening briefing sequences because, again, you have that dark, mysterious atmosphere where you just see Snake's body and his abs, and you can't even see his face. It's totally obscured. It reminded me, again, a little bit of that scene in Apocalypse Now where he finds Colonel Kurtz and the guy's in the dark, and you can't even see his face. You can't even make it out. It's a very cool scene. Um, so there's two things I want to say about the faces. That's really interesting. Is that even though we have the face of, okay, that's what Snake is supposed to look like, it's still a artistic rendition of it. And so I got this vibe or this feeling, which was super interesting, where I know I'm playing Snake in the game and I'm him, but because he doesn't have a face, it had this weird interaction effect where I felt like I could have been that character. I felt almost more immersed in Snake in this game rather than the Twin Snakes, because I realized, oh, okay, that is Snake, that is that character. But I don't know, I just got a different vibe from this one because that version of Snake, because he didn't have a face, I felt more immersed. Like that could have been literally me. It was the same thing like a faceless protagonist like Gordon Freeman. Um, a step in between that would be Link from The Legend of Zelda, because he has a face. It's a little bit abstract, but he never speaks. He never has dialogue. And so I really think that aspect of implementing yourself into a character, I don't know, I think we just lost that because everything's fully rendered now, so you can never tell, oh yeah, this isn't supposed to be me, or that is supposed to be me, or that's supposed to be a different person. And I feel that aspect of really getting immersed in a character by restricting it in a way, it's just, I don't know, I think it's just kind of lost. Um, about the voice acting and the codec calls. So it's a mixed bag, honestly. When I came into this, people said, "Oh, the original voice acting is so much better." I would say yes for certain characters, but then you realize that other characters in the Twin Snakes actually have pretty good performances too. Obviously, there are Ocelot, Snake, and Miller, Liquid. Uh, they definitely sound more like the Metal Gear Solid 2 voices, which would be kind of cemented for the rest of the series. So Snake is a little bit more gravelly, for example. Ocelot has more kind of an accent. I also thought, shockingly, Baker's performance in the original was also much better, which was just a random thing I noticed. Um, but the biggest improvements overall in the original were the Twin Snakes were Naomi and Mei Ling. Naomi has a much more distinct British accent, which really highlights the fact that she is from a Rhodesian background. And so that aspect of her character felt more, I don't know, more present in the story and more emotional. So Naomi was much, much better. Really, really enjoyed her performance. And the biggest downgrade, yeah, from to the Twin Snakes is the original voice for Mei Ling. Um, you want to be sensitive about these things, but I think there's a difference between having simply an Asian accent and sounding legitimately autistic. And Mei Ling has the cutest, most autistic accent in the original Metal Gear game, and I love it. I love it so much. And that Mei Ling is gone. It's not her in 4, it's not her in Twin Snakes. That Mei Ling was so endearing because there was also a lot of more warmth in her voice as well. She was so genuinely excited to, I know, help Snake in his mission. The whole aspect of her wanting to join the Air Force because of the movies like Top Gun, and then deciding she didn't want to kill people because that made her feel bad. It's I don't know why. Like, that's that's so Mei Ling. It was so much of um her nature. It was so distinct that I don't know, it just it was a thing in and of itself. And that Mei Ling, and just the fact she would say things like battle technical regiments and things like this. She would like turn her R's into W's. Uh it was so adorable. It was so adorable and a lot more iconic. And I don't know. All I can say is I love the original Mei Ling and Metal Gear Solid One, and I'm really sad that we don't even have really that character to reference anymore, unless you go back to the original. But yeah, I was very shocked, and like whenever you talk to Mei Ling, it always put a smile on my face. It's like what is she gonna say now or do something stupid? I don't know. I think another thing that also I might have not appreciated at first is that when I was playing the Twin Snakes, I kind of very much got the vibe and the feeling that Master Miller was Liquid. I kind of like figured it out very quickly, while in this one, because their voices are fairly different, and it feels like Master Miller is more Americanized, while Liquid is more of a British accent. It was actually a lot harder to tell and to notice, but in Twin Snakes, they kind of I got the feeling they were operating with this idea that you already knew the spoiler, so it didn't really matter about revealing his identity. But I kind of had this feeling in the Twin Snakes that like, oh yeah, I know that that's Miller. While in it's more believable in the original that he's actually still who he really says he is. I also, I don't know, I debate on how they did Gray Fox in the original versus Twin Snakes, where, I don't know, in Twin Snakes, frankly, it's just very violent how Gray Fox dies. And there's definitely a lot more blood, obviously, in Metal Gear Twin Snakes, which is very similar to Metal Gear Solid 2. And it feels more like an M-rated game, while, I don't know, if I had to give Metal Gear Solid 1 to a kid, I really wouldn't feel that bad because the amount of blood, even when Meryl gets shot, which is probably the worst scene in the game, it's really not super violent. It's like a red spray or whatever. It's really not immense. And I really do kind of miss that era of gaming where if you wanted to be, edgy or whatever, you really were limited by what you had to do or what you could do rather. And so you could do these mature, interesting themes without distancing or putting a barrier between you and other players who might really be actually offended by what they see and say, okay, that's not for me, that's too intense or whatever. Um, I also like the fact that in the original, because everything's a lot simpler, you can see that Gray Fox, one of his eyes, he's blind in one eye. And it just has a different vibe to, again, how he fights and sacrifices himself. I'm not going to lie, though, the cutscenes in Twin Snakes or Gray Fox is fighting Metal Gear are nothing but an improvement. I'm sorry. They're super cool. He's, super in the battle. He's really going all over the place. He's going crazy. I really enjoy Gray Fox in 6. He just does a lot of really cool stuff like he did in the original. I guess the only other insight I have playing the original is definitely still fun, definitely holds up. I would definitely recommend it. And really, this is what I was coming down to. I was stuck with this dilemma where someone would ask me, well, which version should I play? If I've never played Metal Gear Solid 1, which one should I play? And honestly, I think weighing everything all together, I would actually play the original Metal Gear Solid. Even though I played Twin Snakes first, I would still go to the original because the original it's of a certain design and a nature that you won't appreciate until you played first and then go to the Twin Snakes. So, I mean, I had a GameCube at the time. I played Twin Snakes. I still really like the Twin Snakes. And really, if I had to recommend it, I think they're both really good, honestly. But if you really want to understand the core concept of Metal Gear Solid, I would do the original with the original graphics, roles, and all that stuff. That's the other thing, too. I was talking about how the PlayStation is very much, or how the game is very much based around the D-pad. Yeah, the GameCube doesn't even have, well, it does have a D-pad, but I don't think you could have used it, or if you did, you shouldn't, because it's very tiny. You're not supposed to use the D-pad if it was designed for it. So the whole design philosophy around the Twin Snakes using a GameCube controller doesn't work at all. It's absolutely a controller mismatch that completely just totally misses the point of what this game is supposed to be about, how you're supposed to sneak around and kind of like a grid format. And the GameCube is more just, it's, the controller was not designed for it. They were too different because it really focuses on D-pad and then four buttons in that diamond for all of your actions. And using it on the GameCube, it's all asymmetrical. It's not just, it's very odd and it's kind of clunky. It still works, but it's a different experience. So I would really say, yeah, definitely play the original, but I would say honestly, play the original, then play 2, and then if you want, play the Twin Snakes. Or maybe I would play the Twin Snakes before 2, possibly. It's hard to say because the Twin Snakes, it's more or less the same game, and this was the thing that really surprised me. Even though you had all these changes, like in terms of remakes, like what other remake is so different from the original, other than like Resident Evil remake also on GameCube, but mechanically, artistically, aesthetically, musically, voice acting, illy, the Twin Snakes and Metal Gear Solid 1 are the most high profile and yet so divergent remakes just because of the technology jump at the time, that despite all of these differences and these changes, I basically went through the original very, very quickly because I knew what to expect in terms of story and gameplay. And the overall story didn't really change for me, except for the musical parts of it, where it's enforcing certain themes. And I really appreciated, again, the ending theme a lot more in the original because it was brought up in other places. So I mean, yeah, that's just what it is. So yeah, the Twin Snakes, I think it has a place in the Metal Gear Solid timeline and the chronology. Like, should you play it? Like, yes, it's still a good game, but I feel it's something you should definitely play after you've played the original, just to maybe fully appreciate it and appreciate Metal Gear Solid 2 mechanics more. It's kind of like if anything, it's a cool thought experiment. Like, oh, what if we remade a classic game in a series, but with modern controls and mechanics and stuff? And that's why you can see the good and the bad in the Twin Snakes. You can see, oh, they added this in, and this actually is better, and this part is actually worse. So you can, mix and match and see, what's different and not. But yeah, overall, my general feeling after beating the original game is I think I liked it more, honestly. But it still felt more or less like the same game. I mean, I played the Twin Snakes maybe 15 years ago now. It's been quite a while. I played it like as I was coming out of high school, and that whole experience, it felt more or less the same. Yes, okay, some things were emphasized and others weren't, but more or less, I'm like, oh yeah, I've played this before. It's pretty much the same experience, and I was really surprised by that because it was just so different. So yeah, depending on what version you play, you'll still get kind of the full ish Metal Gear experience, but I'm still, even though I played the remake before the original, I'm still recommending you play the original. And I've been like that consistently for almost everything. You always play the original no matter what. There's very few exceptions to that rule. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. Anyway, I can't really say much else other than I just really enjoyed playing the original Metal Gear Solid, simply because it was so short and it was so dense. I beat it in like a day and a half, but I'm still thinking about it. It has that old school resonance where you almost want to project those ideas into the world. I was shoveling my driveway and I took my scarf and tied it like a bandana around my head. It was like stupid things like that, right? But the concepts, the story, the mechanics of this game, they just feel, I don't know, they feel right. They feel real. And it's an absolute classic. It's an absolute classic, and I just wish more games were like this. That's what I'm trying to get you. I wish more games were a 8-hour, 5-hour experience that was dense. And I thought about modern games, and I thought about games that are 20, 30 hours long, and thinking, what if you condense that? What if you tried to shrink a modern game down to a 6 hour experience, and how much it would improve from that? And I was talking to, friend about this, and he was saying, oh yeah, I'm going through this game. It's kind of a slog, some Marvel game. And I saw it, I'm like, it doesn't look terrible, but I asked him, would you prefer that game to be 5 hours long? And he said, yeah. He says, it's outworn, it's welcome, it's overstayed, it's welcome. I really, really don't want to keep playing it. I mean, it's nice that they have all this extra content, but I felt like he said he felt like he was forced to do it because it's part of the main story. He says, I feel like once you beat the main story, you should have the excuse to drop the game and go do something else, because games themselves should not be these 20-hour long, 50-hour long experiences. I mean, okay, Persona and RPGs, whatever, but by and large, you want to not waste someone's time. And it's great you have extra content that should be optional, opinion, and in my opinion. So yeah, shorter, well written, well directed, well voice acted, well composed, musically, whatever games that are just shorter. I think one of my favorite games that is kind of a criminal at this, Nier. I love it, but to fully beat it and get all the achievements, you need to beat the game like 4 times or something, at least. So just stupid stuff like that. Don't do that. Um, but yeah, I think the core. I think they should market things as this is the core experience, and then you can go and do all this extra stuff later. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I think I'll end it here because I could talk about this game and its themes and so much about it. I mean, it really is a masterpiece, and it really has like changed my perspective on life. I think this is the game I needed to play at this age rather than when I was 18. Anyway, all the love in the world or whatever. Really love this game, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.